So just before we get into this episode, I wanted to let you know about a new resource available on our website. The healing process after leaving an abusive relationship can be challenging to navigate. There are plenty of different resources available, but all of that choice can be overwhelming. This is the reason I decided to create a directory of trauma coaches and therapists that work with survivors of domestic violence. They are able to provide a safe space for you to share your experience while also being able to guide you through the healing process. If you'd like to view our coaching directory, just head over to our website, afterdarkpodcast.com. These are the stories of the brave, the strong, the survivors. This is the After Dark Podcast.
If you can make it through living in abuse, you can so make it through life after abuse.
You know, like you're going to push through, and you've just gone through one of the worst experiences, and so if you imagine what kind of strength that takes, you're going to be okay.
But if I could even just help one person just to leave sooner, then that would be amazing.
This is episode 38 of the After Dark Podcast. I thought we might start at the beginning, and I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your home life growing up and what the relationship was like between your parents.
Yeah, so I didn't grow up in a typically what people would call a broken home. Like my home, like my parents were always married. My parents stayed married until my dad died. I had two, brother and a sister. And I think my parents really loved each other for a long time. But then there was plenty of things that they didn't do well. My dad was dismissive and my mom would shut down. And so, but I always felt like they really loved us. But then they made a lot of financial mistakes, and that took a toll on their relationship and the stress level of the house. And so being the oldest, I felt like I remember writing like in my journal in high school, like being really mad at my parents for us having to move and us not having nice things, but never really telling them because I didn't want them to feel worse. So I felt this responsibility for their happiness too. My dad was, like I said, he could be dismissive, and my mom would shut down or lash out. And, she would yell at him sometimes, or he would get mad and leave. But like, there wasn't anything like my mom, and there wasn't a lot of name calling or yelling, and there was never any hitting or anything like that. I mean, I think that their communication was unhealthy, but based on what I know about abuse, I don't think it was abusive.
What were things like in the beginning of the relationship with your abusive partner?
The reason I brought up the financial stuff with my parents is because when he and I met, I was in a really low point. My dad had just died, and I was, in a marriage before that was a perfectly healthy marriage. I just was kind of bored and, young and thought that there was just more out there. My husband at the time, my first husband, had a steady job and a degree and all that, but like I wanted to live a more, I guess, extravagant life. I wanted to, I don't know, I wanted to feel like we had more money, and I don't know. So it was not an abusive relationship, but I left that marriage. And then when I met my most current ex, he immediately, very quickly, we talked about trips and houses and the future. And it felt like, oh, he's so ambitious. He wants all the same things I do. And so he really appealed to that part of me that wanted to be taken care of financially. And I think it had to do because my parents didn't do it. And I always felt like we didn't have enough, and that I needed someone to provide for me, even though I myself was providing perfectly fine. I was providing perfectly fine for myself.
How long were you in that relationship for? And can you remember when the abuse started to occur?
Yes. So it happened about 6 months in was the first time. There were verbal things before that, but I didn't know they were abusive. I just thought, oh, he's moody, or, oh, he's kind of being a jerk. But, I had been a jerk in my relationships before, and I had been mean and cussed at people, or have been short tempered. And so I just didn't really think anything of it. And then, but by this time I had learned a lot more about relationships. I was trying to have a healthy communication. I knew that I was doing better in this relationship that I had in previous ones because I had grown. And but I would get shut out and he would stonewall me, and it just felt like this person's just being so mean to me. I don't know why. And then we got in this really big fight one time, where he got mad at me and then ignored me. And then I got really mad because I hated being ignored. And I had just moved in with him like 2 weeks before, and I threw a glass at him, and he was holding his son. And I don't know, my target was the wall, and that's what I hit. But I was so mad. I just threw this glass. It smashed on the wall behind him. And from there, just remember being on the floor pinned, and he was strangling me. And then I don't know if he got off or I pushed him off, but then we were fighting and I was trying to call for help, and he was trying to record me on his phone and wouldn't let me have my phone. And we were just, it's so hard to actually remember, but that was 6 months into our relationship. And so I moved out and I was like, I'm over, this is over, I'm done with this guy. And then for whatever reason, we started talking again a little bit later, maybe a month or two later, and, started dating again. And I was like, and he had told me, I'll never forgive you. I don't know that I can ever forgive you for throwing that glass. And, I was like, but what about what you did? He was like, that was an army trigger response. I didn't hurt you. And I believed him. I was like, well, he forgives me. So, and he still has a life he wants to build with me, and I'm going to go and do it.
So looking back, can you think of any warning signs or red flags that your partner could have potentially been abusive?
Absolutely. And ones that, I didn't even realize until later were red flags, because I had never been in an abusive relationship and I had never really seen one. So to me, now they're very obvious red flags, but at the time they were red flags that I was just like, I'll just ignore it. And it's not that bad. But like some of them were, he was very, very quick to talk about his ex-wife, which when he and I started dating, they weren't even divorced yet. In fact, they were attempting to work it out. I didn't learn that till many years later. But he was telling me how violent she was and how crazy she was and how she was a sociopath and never to be trusted. And he was so, I was nothing like her. And, I don't know. I just remember eating that up. But also it didn't dawn on me that was like, what a terrible thing to be saying about this person that like you had a baby with. Like, I don't know. My friend was the one that told me later, like, why is he talking about his ex, like on your second date or whatever? I'm like, I don't know. It's fine. He had been arrested for domestic abuse, and he told me about it. And I don't know why. I just said, oh, okay. And I just kind of let it go. Like it makes no sense. I have no explanation, no justification. In no world does it make sense that somebody would tell you that and you would be like, cool, let's keep dating. But I did. And I have no idea why.
Yeah. So why do you think that is, that the red flags can be so clear looking back in hindsight, but in the moment in the relationship, it's just so hard to see?
I think it's because we stay with people or continue. Yeah, I think it's because we date or stay with people who are meeting a need that feels greater than those red flags are scary. Does that make sense? So at the time, he was exciting. We were planning trips. He was appealing to a part of me that I hadn't had appealed to before. And that felt better than whatever uncomfortable intuition feeling I was having about these red flags. And of course, at the time, I didn't recognize that. Now I can look back and say, oh, it must have been that I was just willing to look past it. And then I just kept being willing to look past it. And then I looked past more. And then I just got into a habit of looking past it, At the end of the day, that's how I was able to reconcile that. Like, I know that I was in a place of despair when I met him because I was going through a lot of loss. And I was in a place of, I don't want to be in control. I've always been the one that was more in control of my relationships. I was, you know, in control of my family when my dad passed, and, you know, I had to do all this. And I just was like, I want someone else to help. And I was so willing to do that it came at this expense. And I couldn't really see at the time that that's what was happening. But like I said, at the end of the day, it makes sense that this need outweighed that one.
So you touched on it a little earlier about different forms of abuse in the relationship, but I was wondering if you can share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, after we started dating again, I remember feeling really powerful. I was like, I'm going to let this guy back in, but I'm going to call the shots. You can come over when I say you can come over, and you can, you know, I just was like, let's do this right this time. Let's not move in together right away. Let's not say I love you right away. Like, let's date and have it be normal. And so it felt normal. And for about a year, it felt pretty good. We had a good time together. I didn't feel this sense of fear when he would drink. I didn't like it when he got mad, and I knew that that felt scary. But it was like the fun at that point was outweighing the other stuff. And it's interesting too, because I also didn't realize how many of my boundaries were being knocked down. So he would tell me things like, you have a low libido. You know, I want to have more sex. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, we're having it plenty. But it just kind of never seemed to be enough. And it got to a point where I was like, I'm just doing this to keep him happy. But, you know, it's okay. Again, not the healthiest conclusion, but what I was doing anyway, because the sexual coercion was a theme throughout our whole relationship. So yeah, so we had a good year there. And also my friends were like, my relationships really suffered during this, because when we first broke up, all of my friends were like, good, we didn't like him, and I can't believe he did that to you, and he's terrible. And then I started dating him again, and they were like, what? Like, it was really hard for them. And so I would still see my friends, but never with him. I would do stuff with my girlfriends, or I would do things with him, but we didn't do couples dates. We didn't do group things. I hung out with his friends because my friends loved me, but not us. And, you know, and they never said to me, he can't come. I just knew they didn't want him there. So I only brought him around really infrequently. Then we got engaged, and that felt great. Then we bought a house in one of the most expensive parts of town, and that felt great. And, you know, after we got married, before we got pregnant, there was another big violent escalation. Now, there had been verbal stuff throughout and manipulation, but at the time I didn't know that's what was happening. So one night, one summer night, we went out, and I was doing a cleanse. And I always say this because I remember completely. So I was on a cleanse, so I wasn't drinking. And we went out, and he got really, really drunk, and I wasn't drunk at all, but we were just out downtown having fun with our friends, and he got wasted and got mad at me and was calling me all these terrible names. And then, like, I don't know, again, the memory is fuzzy, but I know that he was throwing chairs, and when I went to get help, he pinned me on the ground and put his hands around my throat again. And I eventually was calling for help, and nobody came. Like, we lived in an apartment. Somebody must have heard me, but nobody came for help. And he threw things and bruised me. And then the next day, felt bad about himself. For several days after that, when the bruises were really bad, I would wear like short sleeve shirts and tank tops so that he could see them. Because I was like, maybe if he sees these bruises every day, that'll teach him. And one day I even said to him, I was like, don't ever do this to me again. And I was so strong, and I stood up for myself. I mean, you know, there were no consequences for his behavior. I didn't leave. We didn't even get in a fight. We had sex the next day. Like, I totally just like rewarded him for his terrible behavior.
So you mentioned before that your friends weren't really approving of your partner, but throughout the time of the relationship, did you have any other support from friends or family?
I mean, I still had my friends, but I never told them anything. I didn't tell them about that night in August. I didn't tell him about the times he was mean and called names. I didn't tell him about the times that I would be like, "Oh, he's drinking. I'm not going to," so that I can kind of stay on guard. Like I didn't tell anybody that because I was so embarrassed. Because I married him, and I made all my friends come to my wedding.
So then how did you eventually get out of that relationship?
Well, it really started when we were at an event in Las Vegas, and another drunk escalation happened where he choked me and I couldn't breathe, and it was so scary. And I got my breath back enough to say, I have children, and I will never forget that, because it was, yeah, obviously every time he got angry and strangled me, it was getting worse and scarier. And I just, something inside me broke that day. And even though I didn't leave him for another year and a half, and then not even file for another 2 years, I mean, that was one of the last physical escalations, but like other ones had happened where he would break things or throw things or yell, make it my fault, tell me, don't tell our therapist. I was like, maybe we can go to therapy, and he would say, you can't tell them what happened, then they'll just take your side. Don't you tell anybody what happened, or then you're really gonna then I'll really bring it. And then he was talking about like legally, and he was like, don't you ask me for child support if you leave. It was just threat after threat after threat. And finally I left. And even then it took me another 6 months after I left, 6, 7, 8 months, to file for divorce, because I was still, I was, part of me was really hoping that he could change, but I just wasn't seeing evidence of it. And also, he was so good at threatening me with, this is going to be a really expensive divorce, or everything we have is because of me. Basically, very much playing into that fear of lack, that fear of my childhood, financial situation. He used that against me at every turn. And it was really scary to take the plunge and hire a lawyer.
So what was that experience like, working with a lawyer?
Hiring the lawyer was one of the most impactful and powerful thing I did for myself, because he kept saying, we can do this without lawyers. We don't want to pay for lawyers. Why are we sending their children to college when we could be saving that money for our own children? And every time we would try to negotiate, he was like, I'm not paying child support, or I'm only paying this much, and don't ask me for this, and that's not fair. And it was all about his terms. And anytime I tried to negotiate, he didn't want to have it. And I just eventually realized, this behavior is not changing. I'm still so scared of him. When he gets mad, my body shakes. I go into this, trauma response. And I was like, I don't want to be with this person. This person, all he wants is to still have sex. And we're not even together. He's sleeping with other people. And yet I'm supposed to still be meeting all of these needs for him. And he's still threatening me every time he gets mad. And so when I hired the lawyer, it just shifted. Again, going back to the motivations behind our decisions, I remember the scales tipping when I decided to hire the lawyer. It all of a sudden, the fear of fighting him and the fear of being in debt that outweighed dealing with him, it just switched. All of a sudden, I was like, I don't care. I will spend any amount of money to get away from you. And that felt true. And it still is. And that was when I was able to hire the lawyer and have somebody speak on my behalf. I felt powerful because somebody with more knowledge about this kind of stuff was standing up for me, because I couldn't stand up for myself with him. And so this was the way that I did it. And we're not divorced yet. We are still very much in the middle of it. And he is getting worse.
So do you have like a rough timeline of how long this process will take?
Hopefully we don't have to go to trial, but if we do, it's set for April of this year. So right now, we have temporary agreements, and we don't speak anymore. I don't speak to him. If we have to coordinate schedules for our daughter, we will. But if he gets angry about something, like asking, like my lawyer asking his lawyer to bring financial documents to the table, he sends me a barrage of angry, abusive texts. telling me just such ugly, mean things. And it jacks up my nervous system and I have to calm myself down. It hijacks the time that I have, if I'm home with my kids and I'm getting this crazy mass texts from him, it's like I've got to take deep breaths and put my phone away and just like and ignore it, because ignoring him is the best way to deal with him. And I do ignore him, but it's like it's so hard to feel the feelings of somebody being mean to you and using everything that you do against you, and threatening you all the time with court, with money, with I'm going to take away custody, with I don't know, it's just very, very exhausting. I mean, it's great we have a daughter, but he's always going to be in, unless he cuts ties with her, which is not going to happen, I don't think. um then we have to deal with each other, and that's fine. I already know that. Like, that's not something that I'm crying over, because we have a kid together, and that keeps us tied together. And fine, I'm going to protect her, because I don't want her dating a guy like him. I would never want, that was another aha for me when I realized I don't ever want my child to be with someone like you. I'm like, and then how am I going to show her that when I am with you? How can I show her and my son, because we both came to our marriage with a son, and then we had a daughter together. How can I teach my children what healthy relationships look like? And they don't always have to be in, this picture perfect home. My kids and I are perfectly happy not having parents that live together, because I can be whole and present and happy and feel safe and meet their needs from a place of internal peace, instead of internal turmoil, trying to also do all the things and keep my own self safe.
Yeah, so how do you think that your future relationships might be affected now after having previously been in an abusive relationship?
That's a good question. And for the first time ever, I am not looking for a relationship. I was always in a relationship. And again, it's always to meet some kind of need. But for the first time, I'm meeting my own needs, and I'm really trusting myself. And it feels different, but it feels good. And I also wonder, how will I trust somebody again? How will I be okay if I'm going and hanging out with somebody and they've had a drink? Will I wonder if they're going to get violent? Like, I don't know. And because I don't know, it makes me not really I'm not really seeking it out right now, because I know that it's honestly, a relationship sounds really scary and kind of awful.
So what kind of advice would you be able to give to somebody that might be currently in a relationship with a survivor of domestic violence?
That's a good question. I think I would say just giving them space when they are triggered, and understanding that triggers are real, and that I think opening a dialogue, the survivor to say, I can get triggered by certain things. And when I do, it feels like this in my body, and I find myself acting in this way. So that way, the survivor is understanding what's happening in her own body. Then her partner can understand that and then act accordingly. Okay, do you need a hug right now? Do you need some space? And so I really think it's got to be a very, very open, vulnerable dialogue and communication. Um, and remembering that healing is not linear, and that you may be very healed. It may have been a long time, and something may still trigger you. And the response that happens is anger, fear, sadness, shutting down. And that there just needs to be a little bit of grace and time and love around it, so that they can get out of it, get out of that moment.
Yeah, that's really wonderful advice, Liz. And on the other side of that too, what advice would you have for somebody that might be currently in an abusive relationship?
One thing I would ask yourself is, have you ever Googled red flags for abuse, or am I in an abusive relationship? If you've ever wondered that slash Googled it, you're in an abusive relationship, most likely. Because if something feels so wrong to you and so off, that you got to start looking it up, like, um I and what I mean by this is listen to your intuition. My intuition was talking to me and I ignored it. And I very much know that some stuff I didn't know, but some stuff I flat out ignored. Um, and I think it's going back to trusting yourself. And that, and the other thing I would say very adamantly is whatever's happening to you, you don't deserve. It is extremely easy to blame ourselves for what's happening. I shouldn't have done that. I did deserve that. Remember when blah, blah, blah happened? Like you find a way to minimize your own experience and blame yourself. And that's exactly what the abuser wants you to do because they are not going to take responsibility for their actions or your feelings. So you don't deserve that. Healthy relationships, even in conflict, are not abusive.
So, Liz, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about the work that you've been doing now to raise awareness of domestic violence.
Yes, thank you. So I realized that I documented my feelings about my relationship in the notes app on my phone the whole time. And I was like, I pretty much have a book here. I've always loved writing and wanted to write a book and didn't know that I kind of already written it. So I compiled it together. I put my notes together and I put it down on paper, and I have a book proposal. But I also realized in order to shop a book proposal like this, I need to know more about this, like not only about the space as a victim survivor, but also as an advocate, because there are major systems that need to be changed in order to protect women and raise awareness for all the different types of abuse that are extremely prevalent. So I decided to write articles and become an advocate, a domestic violence advocate. I am networking with people who have impacts on policy and in the lobbying here in Texas. And I started a website and it's brand new, but basically right now it's my story. It's articles. I'm going to have monthly blogs on there. I'm going to have products on there that you can download, like, red flags, books to read, ways to cope with certain feelings. I'm going to have some guest blogs from friends of mine who are therapists and also survivors and stuff like that. And my hope is to network enough to actually make change all the way down to the roots. Because as much as I want to advocate for survivors and be there in their healing, I also want to tell my story in book form, and also get to the bottom of it, because sending somebody to an abuser program is a band-aid when the systems in place to protect women aren't working very well, and the way we treat little boys and little girls is only perpetuating the broken system. So lots of work to be done, but I am just, stepping in and learning a bunch of stuff and networking with a bunch of people. I want it to be a space where I believe you're not alone, and there is hope. Like that's what I want people to feel when they come to the website, like this is not just happening to you, and there are people out there who will believe you and who will not take your experience, who will take your experience seriously.
So what's the best way for people to connect with you online?
www.lizgbailey.com, and I am Liz G. Bailey on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share that you mightn't have had a chance to before?
I don't know. No, I just really want to thank you for this opportunity. Yes, I guess there is something I want to share. I am a speech pathologist by trade. So, this new advocacy work is scary and exciting and new, and it also gives me a sense of validation, purpose, and hope. And so I guess if there's anything that I want to say, it's like, I want to be a support. And so if anybody listening feels like they need support, I don't know, I have resources for you. And I appreciate this opportunity to not only tell my story, but get out there so that other people who feel really silenced know that there's somebody that they don't have to be quiet around.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story of hope. If you know of anyone that might be struggling with domestic violence, please feel free to share this podcast with them. If you believe in the value of sharing these stories and would like to donate to show your support, I'd really appreciate it. To find out more about donating, please visit afterdarkpodcast.com/donate. So, until next time, my name is Isaac Morano, and this is the After Dark Podcast.